Vampire Hunter D was a series of novels created by Hideyuki Kikuchi back in 1983, chronicling the adventures of a half-human, half-vampire bounty hunter named D in a post-apocalyptic future ruled by vampires. Eventually, 2 anime films were produced. The first, simply titled Vampire Hunter D, was released in 1985, while a second called Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust saw the light of day in the year 2000. Bloodlust would also serve as the basis for the series' only video game offering, and today's subject matter, Vampire Hunter D for the original PlayStation, released in 2000 by Jellicoe and conceived by Victor Interactive Software. I never read the novel series, and I only barely remember watching the first film way back when. I do remember liking it, however, and that brief association, along with the low price point of course, was probably why I initially picked this up first chance I got at an EB Games outlet years ago. The plot of the game follows that of Bloodlust. D has been hired by a rich human to rescue his daughter from the vampire Lord Meyer Link, and D sets off to rescue the girl before it's too late, and he has to do this while contending with a rival group of vampire hunters who are also looking to rescue the girl from the clutches of this evil vampire. There's some twists and turns in the story here and there. Most of them are played in these cutscenes with some pedestrian voice acting that often gets cuts off because this game is old and showing its age, and apparently I can't turn on the subtitles. Brilliant. Vampire Hunter D is a survival horror game similar to the old Resident Evil games. You move around a pre-rendered room and at times the camera will shift to a new angle. Traveling between rooms is represented by this animation of D walking in a black void, which is kinda lame, at least Resident Evil gave you door animations. Also, naturally, the controls are tank controls. You press up to move forward, left and right to turn, and back to sidestep. Double tapping a direction will allow you to sidestep in that direction quickly, and you also have a jump button, useful for jumping on things, in theory at least. The game does have DualShock support, which means you could nudge the analog stick to walk or push it all the way to run, though you could also do this with one of the trigger buttons held. The options let you pick which is which, but doesn't allow for proper button customization, which is a bit of a shame and a bit of a fumble, as we'll get to later. Eventually there are monsters to fight, and you'll have to fight them. D's main weapon is his sword, which you can equip to enter battle mode, and you can fight all them monsters by flailing your blade about. You could also block attacks with your cape and sidestep stuff. In addition, you can also equip a number of side weapons that you'll pick up on the field, including wooden darts, various grenades, or stick with your symbiotic left hand, which can either attack enemies with a magical attack, replenish your lost health, or consume injured foes to restore its own power indicated below. Eventually, absorbing enough enemies will earn you an extra life, which basically revives you on the spot whenever you die, because you will die, and it's game over, and it's back to that Jellicoe screen to do the whole thing all over again. Lame. Fortunately, Vampire Hunter D lets you save your progress at any point and as many times as you wish. No need for typewriters or ink ribbons in this castle. Loading a save, however, has you restarting at the door you last entered the room in, so it's not exactly on-the-spot saving, but it's better than nothing, and sadly, the save function is the most functional aspect of this game. The tank controls are what tanks Vampire Hunter D, no pun intended. It's fine for general walking or running around, except when you're trying to run around corners and you end up getting stuck on a wall, because that's always fun. But as soon as you need to do something more advanced like jumping on a shelf or evade security lasers, it becomes a bit of a frustrating affair, and the shifting camera angles do not help matters either. And then you toss combat into it, and that's a whole other can of worms. The button mapping is what usually fucks me over more often than not. You press X to jump, which is fine, and pressing triangle switches between search and battle mode. Pressing square will use your currently selected item, either left hand or any other item along the way, while circle is your main attack button, which also serves as an interact button for picking up items, opening doors, or inspecting certain bits of terrain. Triggers are used for walking, blocking, and locking onto targets, though the game does have an auto-aim feature enabled by default, but it's not exactly reliable, especially when facing off against greater numbers. You can turn it off if you want, but it also really doesn't help matters. The combat is cumbersome and outright frustrating at times. There's a very noticeable delay in response time when it comes to button inputs. About a second passes from the moment you press a button to jump or arm your sword before either action actually executes in the game. Sometimes the controls will be outright non-functional, usually at the worst times. Your main attacks are limited, slow, and somewhat awkward. There's a mechanic where if you consume blood, your vampire power meter fills up, and this is supposed to make your abilities stronger, your recovery faster or whatever, but I'm not sure it makes much of a difference in the long run. Defeating enemies will yield no rewards, no items or anything of the sort, unless you remember to feature your left hand, and will respawn once you enter a room, which is to be expected. And while you could save at any point at any time, you'll restart at the last door you entered the room in, and any enemies you may have defeated in that room will respawn when you reload the game, so try to keep that in mind. Aside from that, the game does have some open-ended paths you could veer off to. It's usually a straightforward affair on where you have to go, but the game allows for a little exploration as long as you have the right keys or accomplish certain tasks that open those areas up. There's some puzzle elements you'll need to solve to uncover items, and there's some items you can interact with, but there's also some items that seem like you can interact with, and you try to interact with, but nothing happens and you're like, what the fuck? Why is this even here? Vampire Hunter D features a lot of pre-rendered backgrounds for your polygonal characters to move about in, and they're well done for the most part, with some neat little set pieces here and there, though you're mostly going to be roaming around hallways in this here castle, which are fine, but do get tiresome to look at after a while, even if they change the wallpaper. The character models are somewhat decent and do a fine job of recreating the major characters as they appeared in the Bloodlust film this is based on. The grunts you fight, on the other hand, are not all that impressive looking, but generally, in terms of creating this gothic set piece and moody atmosphere, the game pretty much nailed it. It's a good looking game within the format they're trying to achieve. Ditto on the sound. Sound effects admittedly are nothing to write home about, nor is the voice acting. It's serviceable, it gets the job done, gets the story across, but it's really nothing special. The highlight of Vampire Hunter D is its soundtrack, a nice collection of moody slow tunes and some more intense techno-rockish type tunes. I tend to prefer the slower, moodier tunes over the rock stuff, but they're all good pieces. I just wish they were tied to a better game. Vampire Hunter D is one of those games that I really wanted to like. It's based on a franchise that I myself had very little exposure to, but what little exposure I had left enough of an impression that I wanted to give this game a try. And setting that aside, it had that horror fantasy vibe to it with moody environments and an equally appropriate score that I find appealing at times, a nice dose of open-ended exploration to break off from the main path, and the story seemed interesting enough to want to keep going. All of that is negated by the stiff, cumbersome, and laggy controls of the game. The slow pacing might also have something to do with it, but mostly the controls, especially when it comes to the sloppy combat. Had this been straight up action-adventure in a proper 3D environment with a refined combat system and maybe a bit of exploration tossed in, the game might have fared better. But this survival horror slash hack and slash mashup makes Vampire Hunter D an absolute chore to endure. It's not completely unplayable, and it does have its moments, but in terms of horror-themed action or survival horror types in general, there are plenty of better options more worthy of your time. Unless you're a fan of the series this is based on, Vampire Hunter D on PlayStation is best left in the coffin.